Doing them all.
The IGs on it.
Yeah.
Don't spill that coffee. I hope
This
the
is
mic's
quite
on.
a setup.
Yeah, this is. Whew.
Oh.
I forgot to turn off my notifications. Hopefully
Oh,
nobody,
okay.
hopefully nobody calls today.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think of that.
Yep. Well, we're live now.
Oh, we're
Oh,
live.
Now we're live. Woo!
Oh my god, here we are.
Yeah.
We're here. It feels darker in here than normal. What's happening?
Fix that, I think.
We get some lights. Lights, camera,
Do
action.
we like that?
Boom.
Yeah,
No,
I think
we
so.
do? Okay.
Well, we're just gonna have to roll like that.
Yeah.
We're here.
Hi guys.
Welcome to Wildhearts podcast, everyone.
Oh my gosh. Wait, do you have it on the right thing?
Yes.
Like the.
I have no idea. Let's just
Wait, turn
trust it. Just
I
trust
think
it.
this is the back. Oh wait, no. Yeah.
Are
We're
we sure
learning.
people can? Yeah. Are we sure people can hear it?
It's not supposed to be on that
Well,
one,
they
Sean.
can hear us no matter what. What do you
Oh
mean?
yeah, it is.
Yes,
You're
it
right.
is.
You're right. You're
I
right.
didn't move it from the
That's-
last time Jay touched it.
So we have this new baby
Yeah.
that we're testing out.
Yep.
It's quite nice.
We don't know what is gonna come of it yet, so stay tuned.
Cross your fingers.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Sean and I did AJ and
Oh my
Lindsay
God.
James's commit to fish.
I called it the commit to shit when I was with my sister. So.
Commit to shift this morning, so we need to
Get our shit together.
we need to
Yeah.
our muscles are
Was
crying
was today
now.
the first one?
No, they've been doing
last
it for
week.
6 weeks. We just did a drop.
Oh, okay.
Just
I was
to,
like, wait, why are you so short today? If you've been doing
Yeah,
it.
no,
so
this is,
everyone's
it's our
been
first one.
everyone's been building up to this, and,
And
it's
then you
the
guys
final.
are there dying.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
then we get there though, and they're like, today is week 6, fitness assessments. So we started with fitness assessments, and we
Oh my
haven't
God.
been doing this for 6 weeks like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I
And
in
I
the
beat
first
Sean
15
everything.
minutes
Oh, good job.
thought
Yeah.
I don't even know. I just thought it was 30 minutes, and I went all out, and we did this sprinting. We did wind sprints, and I literally
Woo!
dove in the finish line and killed myself and
Yeah.
basically screwed myself the rest of the workout.
Good times.
That's what he's saying. That's his excuse.
That's his excuse. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, basically for the history of the rest of life, Michaela's gonna beat me at anything. So
Everything.
don't
Yeah,
even
it's
worry
just how
about
it
it.
works.
Just assume that she beats me at everything.
Right, exactly.
So we'll just just
Yeah.
clear that out of the air.
Well, welcome.
I feel like I want to do
Ooh, we got hearts.
welcome to the
Oh,
Wild
Who gave
Hearts
us hearts? I
podcast.
can't see.
Oh, we're getting
my
hearts.
God. I've never gone live before, so
I know.
all these little things popping up. It's
Yeah?
so fun.
It's fun. It's a lot to look
There's
at.
5 of you.
There's always a
There
million.
are 5.
There's
of you.
Oh my god,
16.
so many hearts. Who's liking everything?
Have we ever talked about that this might be alternate realities? No.
It could be.
Right.
We're a little bit tanner in that one.
Yeah, can I take mine and show the
Yeah, show the
Yeah.
people what
Yeah.
we're dealing
like
with.
this is how do I do this? I don't
Just
even
turn it.
know. You
Just
turn
turn
it this way.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
There we go. See, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
our little
Oh,
setup
yeah.
right
Oh,
now.
yeah, look at this. We've never done this. This is
This
new.
is-
I know.
Yeah,
So
behind the
many-
scenes.
first.
So many new things.
I clearly don't know what I'm doing.
So many new things.
Oh,
right
that's so good.
All right.
now.
There we
Cool
go.
beans.
But anyway,
Close up.
So before we introduce our guest of the week, we'll just introduce ourselves briefly
Yeah.
for your people.
Yeah,
Your own-
please.
wow, the
No,
hearts
this
are
is the first live video for All Plus One.
Is it?
Yeah. So not just for me
Ooh.
personally as a human, but for my business.
But for
as
your
well.
business.
Yeah.
Oh my
It's a
god.
big day.
Dude, there's so many firsts going on right
There's
now.
so many
Can't even
firsts.
handle it. First
What?
commit to shit,
First
self.
workout.
First workout in a year. Oh my gosh. All right. So for those of you who don't know, I am Michaela of Michaela Jean Photography and co-host of Wildhearts podcast. My other little side business is Maple and Moon Creative, which is a collaborative and community workspace. Opening up this month. We are already actually kind of open, but we're what?
I just thought we're kind of open.
We're kind of open. We're already booking. So we're open for photographers and to rent out a space to shoot. High ceilings, white walls, all natural light
Beautiful.
photography studio. But also available for any kind of creative entrepreneurs who just need a place to work, host a yoga class, any kind of workshop. That whole shebang.
And
Just
it's
got a bunch
in
of plants in there yesterday.
Dover, right? It's
Dover.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Dover Mills.
Old mill buildings. Yep.
Yeah, and just in case you guys didn't know, Tom Brady actually interviewed there last night. So
Oh my god,
that's-
my dad was being a jokester. Oh gosh.
I appreciated it
someone's
so much.
Oh.
Oh,
Oh, that's nice.
sorry. Good day.
Speaking
There we
of
go.
that,
Alright,
perfect, we're good. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Cool. Hi guys, my name's Sean Adam. I'm with Up and Adam Inspirational Speaking, also the co-host of Wildhearts podcast. I also have a book coming out. I'm a co-author in it. There's 35 other men that shared their stories with mental illness, and really all the work I do is kind of centered around my battles with mental illness and kind of coming through and still living life to the fullest. So that's me. Yeah.
What's it
Cool.
called?
Oh, the book. Oh yeah, that's probably pretty important.
I'm not interviewing.
No, I know, this is great. No, this is good. We keep each other in check.
All those women interview.
It's called Guts, Grit, and the Grind Mental Fitness Manual.
Oh, I like
Yeah, so it's kind of set up like that actual design of the book was to be set up like a car manual. Like, so if your like car's got like, oh, the transmission's blown up, like go to this page, this is what you do.
That's cool.
So it's like designed where like, again, there's 36 men in there that like share different types of stories, like divorce, suicide, all that kinds of different stuff. And you know, if you're kind of going through that in life, a lot of times we feel alone. So, you know, I know for me, it was like, where do I start? I remember it was so overwhelming. So the idea of the book is just to give people a place to start. So,
I love it.
cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who are you?
Yeah,
What
just
did
like-
you get
Who's this
here?
girl? Who's this person?
Oh, we're so excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This is so fun.
Yeah. Can you give the people a little bit of an
Yeah.
introduction?
So
yourself?
I'm Stephanie Cofrin. I am the owner of All Plus One, which is a community-based co-working space in the West End of Portsmouth. We offer dedicated and shared workspaces for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, people that work remote, people like me that just live at home with their dog all day and kind of go insane. So
At least you have the dog.
Yeah, that's true. At least I have Penny. But just, you know, it gets lonely. It gets really, really lonely working by yourself. And it's really unhealthy. So that's sort of kind of where this whole concept for All Plus One started. Was I was transitioned from working in an office every day to working remotely. And it was really great for like the first couple months because I didn't have to shower and I could like just
at
roll
first
out of
you're like,
bed
this
and
is
start
great.
working.
Yep.
Because side note, I have like a weird thing. I hate showering.
Same.
And so I think it's a girl thing because
Learning
it's
so
really,
much.
it's less about like, I don't want to be clean. It's like, I hate having to do my hair every day.
Oh my
So,
god, I don't wash
yeah,
my hair. That's
exactly.
My
So
I mean,
that's really what it is.
I have long hair too, so I could like vibe with that. So
Yeah.
maybe it's
Yeah.
not just a girl thing.
No,
Just-
I think
Maybe
it's
it's
a
a hair
hair
thing.
thing. It's a
Yeah.
hair thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really fun for like the first, couple months, and then I really started to feel super isolated and didn't realize how it was affecting just kind of my mental psyche and like other aspects of my life and not just work. And so that was sort of one arm of it, and then the other part was I work in a very like male dominated industry, and I work with a lot of male customers, and I was running into a lot of situations where I was asking for advice and not necessarily like, oh, it's happening because I'm a female, but sometimes it was. And even just handling things as a female can sometimes be different than handling them as a male, and especially when you're working with other males. And I didn't really have that strong mentor role in my company that I could go to. And so the other half of All Plus One was starting to give women a space where they could go and like meet up with other people to become mentors or just become an ear that to like, this is what I had, the struggle that I had today, or this is an issue that I'm having, and get feedback from other strong women in the community. And so those two things kind of blended together over the last couple of years. And what started off as a women's only space really opened up to include everyone, but is still very female centric in the sense that, we incorporate a lot of wellness aspects and self-care concepts, which our society really deems as like feminist, like a feminism type thing, which really should just become a human thing.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah. So that's the All Plus One in a nutshell.
There's
Yeah.
so many amazing things in that.
Oh my god, so many things.
Yes.
I like the thing that you just. I'm gonna touch on the last one that you said.
Yeah,
because,
before we even like dive into
Yeah, I don't even. Yeah, because I just was like, my mind just was like, pew, pew, pew. I think I like what you said about the, like self-care and just kind of like taking care of yourself is like is deemed as a female thing. Like I remember kids in high school, right? Like the sharp dressed kid that like, I don't know, took care of his appearance and like was metro, right? Like it was like called metro,
Right.
or you were gay or whatever it was, and like now it's just like you said, it's like I'm a human. Like
Yeah.
I want to look and feel good.
Right.
Why is that going to be like labeled something?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So that alone to me is awesome.
Yeah.
You know, especially as like, you know, really, I think from the opposite end of the spectrum is, you know, man, there's challenges for both sides, right? But you know, for us, I feel like there's so much of this like message that's perpetuated, like, oh, be tough and like,
Right.
you know, I don't do that stuff. I don't do coconut oil. Dude, who puts lotion on? It's like
Who goes to the doctor?
I put lotion on because I don't want ashy, cracked skin. Thank you very much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like just stuff like that, and it's been tough to like kind of break through that. You know, I had to be like, well, dude, F what society thinks. Like,
Right.
I want to be healthy. You know, and it's I like that. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. That's kind of the driving. But I say that's the driving force. It's really been hard as creating a brand and like what's my one sole mission, because I'm like, oh, there's this and there's this and there's this. So one of the biggest driving forces is just like mainstreaming wellness, and not like wellness in the sense of like, I'm gonna go get a massage today and that's my self-care. It's like really like tying in the physical, but with also the mental and the emotional aspect of it too. So you know, having meditation throughout the day and that, I hate to use the term, but work-life balance, where we're not really successful just because we're really busy and we're burnt out, because that's really how we learn to define success, is like who's the most tired and who's the most busy and who's the most overbooked and double booked and running around like crazy. And I feel like the biggest hypocrite when I say that, because that's me every day. But but at the same time, I'm recognizing this doesn't mean I'm successful. This just means I'm unbalanced. And so
well, it means you're working towards your
idea
of success.
Some of it's
too,
you know, it's a progress, it's a path. But I can remember like in my 20s, like I had a girlfriend, and every time I try to call her, she's like, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. It's like, everyone's busy. Everyone's super busy.
Well, and there's it's like you're searching for some kind of validation too, by like saying, constantly saying you're busy.
Yeah. I would really love to reach the point where everyone's like, how you doing? And I'm like, I'm not busy. I feel really good.
But everything's just like going. Like,
everything's just moving.
Well, I wonder, like, might be a tough question for you because you do have so much going on, but I think like oftentimes when you step into the entrepreneurial world, it's not just like when you start, like it's not just like you're like doing 8 bazillion things. You're kind of like, oh, like how am I gonna fill my day? Like how, you know what I mean? So there's like that, and then you feel, I know at least for me, it's like then you feel like, oh well, I'm not busy, so something's wrong, or you know what I mean? And I think it's such an interesting contrast because we've been fed this like team no days off, rise and grind, like constantly grinding. But like anyone that's like in a holistic like sense of wellness knows that there's got to be balance to that. You need to have balance to that. Like I recently, I feel like I've been going like hard since Jan 1, and like my body's just been like
and this is the time of year I think when you get a lot of people with that like January resolution. They're like, and this is right when like if you look around, so many people are starting to get the flu right now. Like they're reaching that point of burnout. So knock on wood.
I'm not sick, but I already have that burnout thing.
Can we just like real quick talk about the name of all this one, because I think it's so genius and I don't want to forget.
So it was funny. I was coming up with names, and like I went through so many of the like traditional I call them like the IT like San Francisco like type names, like the you know, the we work and the I this and the you this and like whatever, and like the apples and the quick little like names. And so when I came up with All Plus One, it originated from a quote that I read in this book, and I was coming back from living in New York, and I was having a really tough time. I was in my early 20s, and
so you've had this name for a bit.
It's just kind of words that like have had a lot of meaning to me for a really long time. And so I was staying with my aunt and uncle when I came back from New York, and she had a stack of books by the bed, and I just picked up one off the top, and it's called A Year by the Sea. And it's about this older woman who's, you know, in her 50s or 60s, and her kids are all grown up and they have kids and they're all out of the house, and she's experiencing empty nest syndrome. And then all of a sudden her husband's like, I think we should like take some time apart. And her whole world gets turned upside down because she'd been a stay-at-home mom forever. And she goes to live in their house. I think it was actually in like York or like somewhere local to here, for a year by herself. And she had to get a job and become self-sufficient. And so one of every chapter started off with a quote, and one of the quotes was, the word alone derives from the the two words from the Greek language of all and one. And the concept of being alone is not about being all by yourself, but becoming one with all of yourself. And so this really resonated with me when I was like in my early 20s, like really struggling with life. And so I actually ended up getting it a couple years later as a tattoo. And so
I didn't know that.
I have it on my foot, and I just had it like as part of my life and sort of as a reminder and a little self mantra. And then when I was coming up with names for All Plus One, I came up with a tagline first because my original concept for the business was so much bigger than what it was, and the idea was that it was this one space where you could go and really get your day done. And so my tagline was "Life is all over the place, escape to one space." And I wrote it out, and like the words "all" and "one" were like right there, and I was like, oh my god. So I was like, it's a mouthful and people are going to be like, what does that mean? And it doesn't shout co-working space when you hear it, but it has like a super special meaning. So yeah, so that's it.
Oh man, I love that so much. I think it's perfect.
Wow.
I think it's so perfect.
Damn. That is so cool. And it like happened years ago.
Yeah, like forever ago. I mean, almost 10 years ago. I'll be 33 this year. So
that's so crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Oh,
patience. Patience is a virtue.
It is.
I know why they say that.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, let's like go back in time.
Okay.
Let's like, where does your story like begin? That's such a weird question.
Yeah,
but, like,
it is.
You know, that moment that you feel like
started. I mean, yeah, for my business, for me as a human, as a
let's just go back to so let's just give people like a brief summary about like your childhood and like the moving around, and then let's like immediately dive into that like mind-boggling decision at age 11. Like, because that is like I remember reading that. No, but seriously, like that was legit. So
so just so everyone knows, they like Michaela and Sean sent like prep questions, and I had a really hard time. I had a really hard time answering some of them, and I didn't get them to them on time because but yeah, so I'll just start from the very beginning. So my parents were never married. So actually I was a one-night stand baby, fun fact. They met my dad was like a manager of a band, and my mom was like a girl in the bar watching the band. And
that's
so it's
that's kind of cool though.
But then they met, and then had conceived me, and then they actually stayed together through the pregnancy, and my dad proposed to my mom, and then they were like, this is a terrible idea, we should not do this. And so but my dad's always been a huge part of my life. I grew up living with my mom, and when I was 4 she married a guy in the military, and so that kind of prompted us to start moving around a lot. And we were like domestic for a while, and then we went overseas in Germany for a little bit, and then came back, and then we were stationed in Killeen, Texas. That was sort of our like the last place we were rooted. And I spent the summer with my dad, and little did I know at the time it was because my mom and my stepdad were like going through a really hard time. And so I like went to go live with my dad for a month basically up here in New Hampshire. And then I came back, and they're like, we're getting a divorce. And I was like, I was traumatized because I was like, wait, people don't get divorces, because my parents had never been married, so I didn't know that was even a thing. And so I probably less than 6 months later, I decided at 11 that I wanted to move back up here, or not move back, but move up here to live with my dad. And I didn't even talk to my mom about it. I like went and like hid in my bedroom and like called my dad, and I was like, hey dad, like, how you doing? It's Tuesday night. Like, I want to come live with you. And he was just kind of like, whoa. And so we talked more about it and decided we would do like kind of a trial thing and make sure it's a good fit. And then I went and told my mom, and so I did. So when I was 11, I packed up and moved up here, and it definitely, like, I think fundamentally has changed like who I am. Not just because living in Texas is so much different than living up here, but just
kind of though.
It is. That's like, it is a very, very different culture. But also just being, growing up with a single dad and like that aspect of it. And I think because of it, I was a little bit more independent. Coming up here, like my dad had never raised kids before, so all of a sudden
this was your first time living with him.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of like new things for both of us, like going through a lot of growing pains.
Oh my gosh.
But so I moved in with him when I was 11, and then we sort of like we were in Henniker, New Hampshire, which is the only Henniker on earth for those that don't know.
I just passed a truck that said that exact same thing on it.
Oh, really?
It was like, we're the only Henniker.
Yeah, it's the only Henniker on earth.
Weird.
Yeah.
That's so weird.
That is so weird.
That was literally this morning.
Oh, strange. I wonder what they were advertising.
Yeah. I don't know.
Was it for like Henniker Brewing Company, I wonder?
Well, that's what I thought, but I don't think it was. Because that's like the only thing I know that's in Henniker.
It's the only thing
that beer is like
Henniker.
miles to miles or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I used to play hockey in Henniker.
Probably.
But yeah.
That's so crazy.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we lived there. Then we came out to Durham because he ended up teaching at UNH.
Oh, no way.
And then I went to Oyster River in Durham, and then started at UNH. And then at 19, actually, so when I moved up here when I was 11, my dad was going back to school. He had dropped out when he was 19, which was kind of a fun foreshadowing to the next part of my story. And so he was going back to school to finish his degree. And him and my uncle had bought a condo for my grandparents to live in. And so when he decided to go back, he moved in with them. And so when I moved up here at 11, he was going back to school to get his degree. And so I moved in with them. So we lived with my grandparents and until we moved to Durham. And so my grandmother sort of became like my mother, like a second mother, like living with her. And when I was 19, she passed away very suddenly of a heart attack. And so I was going to school at UNH and just very quickly, like, what I didn't know at the time, but like had like a huge situational depression, situation. And so I withdrew from school. I lived in a house in Newmarket for a semester, just like not knowing what to do with my life. And then I packed up my car one day and decided I was moving to California. I will never forget going to tell my dad. And I was like so naive and young, and I was like, yeah, so I think I'm just gonna move out west. And he was like, go for it. And now that I'm older and like getting to an age of like having kids soon, I'm like, he's insane. Like, who tells a 19-year-old to like pack up their car and move across the country?
But you learned so much.
Yeah, I did, but like struggled a lot too.
19's young.
And I've had my cousin, like I've had younger cousins because I did that, like reach out to me and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And I'm like, how much money do you have? Like, and I'm like asking all these questions that they don't want to hear. They're expecting me to be like, do it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it was freaking tough. It was super hard. Like I moved to New York with like $700 to my name. I like moved out west and like had no idea what I was doing. Had never like had to lease an apartment on my own before and like all these things. So so I moved out west. I lived in Colorado for about 3 years and then started a bunch of different like entrepreneurial businesses out there, and then came back east and lived in Nantucket for a summer, and then moved to New York. I worked in fashion, and then Boston, and then like realized I needed to go back to school. So I finished my degree and I went back to UNH Manchester, and then settled in Portsmouth because I kind of seen the world at that point and had lived in a ton of huge cities, and I tried so hard to be like that really cool city girl, and I hated it. It made me so miserable. Even in Boston, like, 'cause to me Boston was like, oh, it's home, like it's it's the East Coast, and Boston probably makes me more miserable than any other city I've lived in, like more than New York, more than like major metro places.
It's very disorganized.
It is. It's so disorganized. The people really aren't friendly. Like, and I mean, my fiance is from like north of Boston, so it's not everyone. I'm not stereotyping. Like, but yeah, living in the city, everyone's just kind of like angry and
in their own ways, kind of. I remember saying that over and over again when I moved out to Colorado. Like, I remember people saying the similar thing, and I was like, yeah, everyone like out west is just much more like relaxed and calm and like willing to ask you how your day is and like smile at you when you like walk by. And
not
in Boston, like New England, but Boston in general, or like specifically, like people are just kind of in their own way, heads down.
Yeah, it's very much a post-collegiate city too. So because there's so many colleges there, I think everyone kind of like graduates and stays, and then you just get this like very bro-y collegiate culture in Boston. And so I never really subscribed to that because I didn't do like the typical college thing, and so it wasn't my scene. But then when I did graduate, when I was like 27 and finally graduated with my degree, I decided, I was like, I've been bouncing around enough, like I need to pick a place. And so I'd always loved the Seacoast. I loved Portsmouth. And so I decided to come back here. And then I was here for a year and a half, and then my commute to work was so terrible because I was working in Burlington, Mass at the time. So So I did like a stint in Boston and went back, and I cried the entire way down to driving to Boston. And I was like,
Moving?
moving. And I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
this is such a mistake. This is such a mistake. And I knew it
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah.
But I was living with a really, really good friend of mine. So I was like excited for that part of it. But I just could feel this like sense of like sadness leaving Portsmouth, which was so funny. I'd never experienced that my whole life. And so then I immediately, almost like the next weekend, started looking for a house to buy in Portsmouth.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm doing this. It's going to give me roots. It's going to give me like a
Cool.
reason to
Yeah.
stay in one place. So here I am.
Are you still in the house?
No, so I
Same house?
rent it out now. That was actually
Okay.
my tenant that was calling me.
Oh.
They're moving out today. So
Oh.
so I rent it out now, and then my fiance and I moved like 3 miles down the road.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, but we're still in Portsmouth. Yeah.
But like, what was it about Portsmouth? Because like, being someone who like has gone and like come back,
Yeah.
like also came back, like there's just something about the seacoast.
There really is. I think growing up down south, the quaintness, like there's really no other way to describe New England. Like it's just very quaint. That doesn't exist down south. Everything's just, it's so different. It's very like new and industrial and spread out. And there's not these cute little, I mean, I'm not gonna say there's not, again, it's a stereotype or generalization, but there's not these like really cute downtown areas you can like walk around and pop into coffee shops. And I just have always been attracted to that. And I think living in Europe and traveling in Europe quite a bit, like that, Portsmouth always reminded me of that, and like having those really small little areas. But then the water, like I've always been drawn to the water. I still, like to this day, I love paddleboarding. I love being like on any type of water vessel because it's the only place that my mind really calms down. So I think that was a huge draw as well. And I can't even say the community because at the time I didn't really know the community. So that was like a huge bonus is coming back and then realizing how close knit Portsmouth is, and just meeting everyone and getting really integrated over the last couple of years.
When do you feel like you really like immerse yourself into the community? Because you've been here for how long?
I mean, minus the little stint where I went back to Boston, since 2013. So 2014, 2013. Yeah, December 2013 is when I moved to Portsmouth. So yeah, a little over 5 years now. Wow, it's crazy.
When you were moving back here, I was leaving.
Oh, really?
To the
We were like crossing.
We were like,
I was stopping
We were
my
crossing
first.
paths.
I was stopping my first business.
Stopping your first.
December 2013. Yeah.
What business was it?
Landscaping up and Adam property maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. Fun
so
little.
cool. History is so cool.
You know what I want to talk about is this, like, first of all, I love your dad for saying, just go. Like, that's, I feel like that's me.
He was 19 when he dropped out of school. And so that was like, and he moved down to Texas. And that's ultimately how I ended up being down in Texas and meeting my mom. But to him, he was like, yeah, go do it. I did it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like this element of being supportive in his eyes. But I think, like, I just want to talk about, so I think you talk about things so casually sometimes. Like, reading your thing, it's just like the way you write about it is like so casual. And I'm like, okay, you drove across the country at 19. Like, oh yeah, I just started a bunch of like entrepreneurial suits on. Like, can we talk about like the courage, like as a 19-year-old, to like go across the country and just this like willingness to just dive into the unknown? Because I think just because we're like an inspirational podcast, right? So many people, and even myself, have gotten like, oh, I'll start that when I'm ready, or I'll be happy when I have X, or I will start the business when I have like this much money, and if you do that, you're never going to be ready. There's always going to be a new excuse. So I think there's like a lot of power to, even though it was a struggle, like,
definitely.
Like, that's life, right? Like, and you probably have gained so much wisdom and knowledge and confidence in yourself through doing those things, as opposed to like sitting on the couch being unhappy or like wallowing in, you know, not to say like, obviously it's a very tough thing to lose your grandmother and someone close to you, but you know, you could have just sat there, but you got up and like went, you know. And I think, please talk about that, because I don't want to underplay that, because I think that's like a lot of courage and bravery, especially at a 19-year-old. I was like,
I at the time, I don't think I thought of it so much as courage or bravery. It was more like being super sporadic and spontaneous and not thinking of the consequences. Like, it's ignorance is bliss. And so it was like, I'm just gonna move across the country and I'm gonna go live in California and everything's gonna be great. And everyone could have told me like, you know, do you have this, this, and this? And I'm like, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, and I think because I moved around so much as a kid, like new experiences were not scary. And so, and I just didn't, and I think I still am this way now. I recognize it more, but I do things and don't really think about them until after. And so I guess it could be a fault or a
I
strength.
get that. It's really is.
Yes, yes. It's
Oh, you're a Leo too?
Just yeah.
Oh
we're
man, a
both
couple of Leos.
Yeah. So I didn't really think about like the what ifs or the consequences or like really had a plan at all. And so like I didn't even know like what route I was going to take, like on the way I stopped in Texas first and then made my way out to Colorado. And I just was kind of like bouncing around. There's like this movie that I love. It's such a cheesy movie. It's called Love and Sex. And it's,
oh my God, I love that movie.
Yes!
And I never watch movies.
It is such a good movie.
Yeah, how do you
I know. That's so funny because I never know
And
movies.
like 8 months of knowing you, every time I bring up, I don't watch movies. First one you say,
no, I don't know.
Love and Sex. It's like such a little.
It's a very
hidden
random
gem.
movie.
Yeah,
too.
people like don't know about it.
Yeah.
And I watched it for the first time in high school, I think, and then I still own it like on DVD.
Yeah.
And she talks about like her dating life, and at the end when she breaks up with him, like before they like get back together. Spoiler alert. For anybody really wants to see Love and Sex. And she's like, oh, I was just like floating down this river, and like boom, I bumped into you, and boom, I bumped into you, and I was like, it kind of felt like that for my 20s. Is that I was just like sort of floating through, like, oh yeah, sure, I'll go this way. Oh, I'll do this. Like the river's taking me this way. And I think that's pretty common in 20. Like, I don't think that's a weird thing because
I think so.
we don't really know what we're doing. We're still trying to figure it out, and so we're just like very easily influenced by the river, like taking us through. But yeah, I went off on a tangent there. I forget. So the original question is like,
well, like, just no, that's fine. Like, you're doing a great job.
No, I was like, wait, what?
No, I mean, I wanted to like kind of just point out like, just talking about that ability to just take the leap, you know what I mean? And like the courage, at least in my eyes, like I look at that as like, especially a 19-year-old, very courageous. And like you said, you don't, in your, like that early in life, you have no idea who you are.
No idea.
And I think like,
everyone thinks they have to know.
Yeah.
Which is the hard part.
That is
or regurgitated this like, I mean, and you know, hey, this is an opinion, solely. So before I say this, is like, this whole like idea that we've been like fed, like, oh, you got to go to college, you got to get a 4-year degree, and like to me, like, so just a couple of things that don't even make sense about that is, okay, you're like you said, you're going into college at 18. Okay, so you're telling me I'm gonna take a guess at what I like. Like, I'm gonna pick a psychology degree. Well, that's what I'm saying. So I'm gonna take a guess and pay, you know, on average $20,000 to $40,000 a year at a guess, and then you come out and you're $100-something thousand in debt, and then you're like, oh, well, this is what I chose, but maybe I don't even like it.
Oh God.
So that whole system just doesn't make sense to me. So like, what I love about your story, and granted, it's very similar to mine, so I might feel like very biased, but like I've tried so many different things because, especially in your 20s, like you said, you just go.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know. I just feel like there's this element of like you said, all plus one, you need to get to know who you are before you can like charge forward in a direction and feel like you know. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like, I'm 30 and this is the first time I feel like, okay, this is like, I know what I'm doing. Yeah. Like, and I don't even know. I think I just went on a tangent, but.
Well, I think, so I kind of remember more, it was more like the jumping into like the entrepreneurial things. And I think even with all plus one, I can say like, I have my head straight, like on straight way more than I did in my 20s. But even with this, I wasn't like, you know, oh God, what does it take to run a co-working space, and what do I need, and how much money, and this? I was like, I'm gonna do this. So I still have that in me, very much so. And like through the last couple of years, like, so I started this in April. It'll be 2 years ago that I started all plus one, and it's just, sorry, I got distracted. It's just been such a learning process, and I think each business that I kind of dove into and was like, oh, I'm going to do this. Like I got a job waitressing in Boston when I moved back from New York. And I just started spending a lot of time in the kitchen, like talking to the cooks and the chef, and was fascinated by food. And so I just kept talking to them more and more. And in restaurants, they do what's called staging, like where you come in and you like basically shadow for a day, and you work for free for a shift. And so the pastry department, the restaurant was kind of falling apart at the time. And I had just gotten really into, like, as a hobby, gotten into baking. And I thought I was like, had this really big hobby as a baker because I liked baking cupcakes. And so I would like come into I would make all these cupcakes and bring them to my chef. And I was like, can I please stage? Can I please stage? And so finally he let me stage at, he was like, yeah, we're short a shift, come on in. And so I did that. And then I ended up like doing that 1 day a week, and I'd waitress 3 days a week. And then I would do that 2 days a week and waitress 2. And then I just jumped into it full time. And I never once thought about the fact like I had no training or I didn't know what I was doing. I just did it. And so that was the same thing. Like you take that exact like cookie cutter, and it was the same thing when I moved to New York and decided I wanted to work in fashion. Like I got a job doing product development for a legwear company, and I remember sitting down my first full day, and I was like, holy shit, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like it was so scary. But I just, I did it and I figured it out. So
That's amazing.
it's like the sink or swim mentality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was like there's a perfect example of this. Elon Musk, one of the greatest entrepreneurs out there. His first like what you're saying just reminds me so much of this. I read this one time. Like his story is like he went to go for an interview. I think he's, I don't know, however young he was, 23 or something. And they made him wait for 45 minutes, and he literally was like, fuck this, I'm starting my own company. Like that's literally what happened. He said fuck this, got up and went and started his own company, and now like look at what he's doing. You know what I mean? Like I don't think he was like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do it.
Right.
He just did it. And I don't want to take away from like, there's like business plans, and that's like probably smart to do and stuff.
Oh
but,
no,
like,
you definitely need to have those.
Well, like those are
the finance part is definitely super important.
Yeah, but I mean, I think like that's the stuff like you can figure out. Like I think I know for me, and I wonder just from kind of hearing you and like learning about you is like I know my mind moves fast, so like if you start thinking way too much of that stuff, like it can get super overwhelming. Like I'm just like I had a friend tell me when I was 23, he's like, Sean, if I drive by a house and kick you out the door at 55 miles per hour and like tell you to run up to the door and sell something, you're gonna do amazing.
Right.
But if I tell you 10 minutes before, you're gonna like panic and have like an anxiety attack. And I think that there's such a like powerful element to that. But I mean that's also up to the individual. Like how do you work best? So I think that that's really cool that you have that space to do that.
Yeah. No, there's definitely, even with like when I signed my lease, my fiance was like, how much is the monthly like lease, and like how long is your lease, and so how much are we on the hook for? And I was like, I don't know. Like I was like, well, I'll just figure it out month to month. Like, and so he's the one that's like stays up at night like crunching these numbers and like figuring it out from that sense, and I'm just like, no, I'll make it work. So, and I think from like a perspective of failure, like a lot of people have asked like, oh, like what if you fail, what if it doesn't work out? And I have this conversation constantly with Chris, my fiance, and I was like, I have done so many other things and figured it out along the way. This isn't the hardest thing I've done. And so even if it doesn't work out, like, the economy takes a turn or whatever, and people decide they don't want to be in co-working spaces, or I don't know, WeWork goes belly up and everybody decides to not to do this anymore. I go out and get another job. It's not like I'm less marketable because I decided to try to start my own company. I mean, obviously there'll be some financial aspects of that, but I don't think of it as a failure. It's like, okay, well, what's next? Like that didn't work out. Let's figure out another path. Like, so, and I know not everyone's wired that way.
But I feel like people I could be so wrong and naive, but I feel like people can be wired that way. They're just, I don't know, I think people get so caught up on this like idea of like fear of like things not working out. And I think too, with like your kind of history of like doing so many things and having to struggle and having to like work through obstacles, like it's great. Like I know travel did this for me, like being like not having no idea where you are, where you're gonna sleep, and like where to get food, and like blah blah blah. Like I mean, putting yourself in those situations throughout your life kind of like preps you for the potential of like a larger failure or a larger like unknown.
And that's the thing where I think like my fiance did everything very traditionally. I'm really glad he's not in the podcast. He'd be very upset knowing I'm talking about him. He's very private, doesn't have a social media footprint at all. So my nameless fiance,
I know, it's so funny whenever there's like your engagement photos, like the ones you posted, like his face is like
yeah, it's like cropped out. I told him I was gonna start doing like the Ryan Reynolds thing with him,
Yeah.
like posting our engagement photos, but like cropping his face out awkwardly because he just hates being online.
So funny.
But he did everything so traditionally. Like, you know, he graduated high school, went to college at BU, and then got a job right out of college, and like, you know, is the type of person that would like work at a company until he retires, and that's a great quality to have. Like, I look at it as a strength because to me, like, I get bored after a couple of years, and so I'm like itching for the next thing. And so it's a really great balance. But he's like, "You're crazy for starting this company," and I'm like, "You're crazy for being so scared." You know, like it's so it really is this like back and forth. But it's good. It keeps me like very level-headed and grounded. But it's the figuring out. You know, and I remember moving to Denver and I got my first paycheck, but like your first paycheck you couldn't set up as like auto whatever, like auto deposit. Or maybe I didn't even have a bank at the time. I probably didn't have a bank account, to be honest. Like, and so I got this check, and I was going around. It was like a Sunday or something, and I was trying to cash this check because I literally didn't have a penny to my name, and I had no food. And so I was like, I remember going to Walmart and like going to one of those cash check places, and I was like, "Can you please cash this for me?" And they're like, "Oh, we can't unless you like have an account or blah blah blah." Like, it was just like this big thing, and I remember just like bursting into tears and being like, "I'm not gonna eat if you don't cash this check." And so it's like not a like, oh, I was in poverty and like starving. I know there's people that way more difficult situations, but it's like, you know, I was like definitely had to figure it out, and like not a lot of people at 19, 20 years old are faced with that. So to your point, I think it does like really shape you in terms of not being afraid of things, because you're like, no, like I didn't eat for a week because I didn't have money or couldn't figure out how to cash a check. So like starting a new business, not
got it. No big deal.
I think there's so much power to that, because it's like your experiences, like if you face stuff like that, like it just sets you up for like strength down the road. Like your so-called, I guess you call them mistakes or failures or whatever you want to call them, right? Like that experience, you're like, oh, whatever. And I kind of feel the same way, because like in the last like 5 years, I've had like 3 times where I've had like $4 in my bank account, negative $158 in my bank account, and I'm just like, I don't know, like when I started all this, like, you know, I was just going through this major transition, like went through all my savings and like blah blah blah, and I was just like, yeah, whatever, cool. Like it's gonna just get like, it enabled me to just keep marching forward instead of getting stuck in like, oh my god, I like, because you've talked about this before, like you can focus on like what am I trying to create, or you can focus on the fact that like, oh my god, I have negative $158 and I die, like everything's, it's just like, it kind of is that like faith and believing like it's gonna work out.
Well, putting your energy into solving the problem and not kind of like wallowing in the hard stuff. But
I was really good at that for a long time.
I had a professor at UNH Manchester when I went back to school who was my advisor and became like a really good friend through that process. I was applying to all these different jobs because I was getting ready to graduate, and I was applying to like Kraft and like these huge corporations, and I had this like my nose turned up at this concept of like working for a corporate company, and was talking to him about it. And I'd already kind of tried to start a couple of different businesses throughout my 20s before going back to school. So I was like, no, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I have to start my own business. And he sat me down and he was like, Steph, he's like, you need to go work for a big company. He's like, you need to go get your feet wet. You need to get beat up a little bit. You need to figure it out. You need to make some money and then go start your own business. And it was the best advice that I could have listened to, because I could have gone out on my own and tried to do something and, you know, started then, but I wouldn't have been ready. And I think that there's a balance in terms of like just going for things and doing it. But I think there's also like, there's some things that you can learn from structure and from like working for bigger companies. It's not always this like, I have to be an entrepreneur and I have to be a creative and I can't go like do this and this, I'll be a sellout. I went and got a job working at IT sales, and I've done it for the last 4 years. And not only did I make enough money where I could buy 2 homes and have, you know, some structure to myself to be able to push me forward with All Plus One, but it taught me a lot about what I don't want in a business and what I don't want in a culture. And ultimately, because of that experience, I am now starting All Plus One. So I think that's like a really important like sort of the other side that no one wants to like admit. Like it's sometimes necessary, or like it can be a really good learning experience to just like, you know, work for someone else for a little bit and figure it out.
I think it's so funny that you're saying this, and I'm sure my mom is watching right now because she's been like, I've always been the same way, and it probably is the Leo in us, but I was the same way. I was like, I don't need like anybody else. I'm just gonna figure it all on my own. I'm gonna start my own business. I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm gonna move here by myself, like whatever it is. And she would always say the exact same thing to me. She would say, you just gotta like get yourself into like a big company, like a big corporation, and like, kind of like work your way around there and like get people's attention and learn like from. I never took that route.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mom. But, like,
but I mean, it shows like you can still be like you're
like
still doing all of your dreams and like doing all of these things, and so there's different paths. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe not with the same level of financial security, but
and it's like Chris and I talk about that all the time because he's like we met at Oracle and doing sales, and he's like, I could take $50,000 right now and go retire. Like he could make it happen, and I completely believe him. And
take 50 and go get some groceries.
Yeah, exactly. And so I have never been like, I clearly have like had some financial struggle in my life. I grew up with a single mom and then a single dad, and he's like, you know, money isn't everything, and I'm like, money does not buy happiness, but it also can prevent a lot of stressful situations. And so there's like definitely excess, and like, do I need 2 homes? No. Like, would I be fine living in an apartment in Portsmouth or like, you know, anywhere? Like, absolutely. But you know, it's like, I think that was also sort of something I had to do, was step back and like let go of that pride of being like, no, I'm going to do this on my own. Like, I'm going to make this happen on my own, and, you know, go work for a company, because it ultimately gave me a lot of stability that I was lacking at the time. So,
oh my gosh, yeah. And I think the way that you're raised too, and like the experiences, maybe not even so much the way you're raised, but all of the experiences that you have like leading up, like all the ones we just talked about, kind of formulate that decision that you're going to make, whether you want to like put yourself into a place of like having that security and like learning from that larger company, or from doing it a different way.
Right.
Can you talk about like the balance and like kind of working full time and starting this business and for a wedding and being everywhere?
It's been interesting, and I definitely have had plenty of breaking moments. Actually, Friday being one of them, and I totally just had like a meltdown on Friday, because it was like everything was kind of like coming on top of each other. But I think the biggest thing is every day is like a new day in terms of like creating my to-do list and what's my priority, and just trying to stay on track. It's like, I don't think I do it well. Like, I have all my friends and stuff are like, how do you do it? How do you do it all? And I'm like, I
think you do fantastic.
And it's like, I think every person is so much more critical on themselves. I feel like I could be so much more productive than I am every day, and I could be so much farther along on X, Y, and Z. And I could respond to emails on time, because to any of you guys that I have to correspond with via email that are watching, I apologize, because I am the worst at responding to emails on time. So yeah, I just working with Nicole as our wedding coordinator. I know. I think we've had this discussion. Nicole, it's a Mauer or Mower? Because we haven't actually met face to face. But I'm super excited to work for her, and she's so cute. She'll email me, and like I'll email her back like 3 weeks later, and I'm like, I'm so funny. But it's like, unfortunately, with like the day job, and I travel a lot for my day job, and then with All+1, and like things are really ramping up finally with All+1, the wedding has kind of become the back burner thing. So, but so that doesn't really answer the question. That just talks about how it's a struggle. So yeah, I think it's just been, I think it really is like each day I just have to kind of like reset, and I really can't look at the bigger picture. And I've always looked at that as a weakness, that I'm not really a big picture person, but it's the only way I can get through it, is just look at like, okay, I've got to finish my financial budget for All+1 today. I've got to do X, Y, and Z meetings for Oracle, and then I've got to like respond to my wedding coordinator today. It's like, and that's what I'm going to do today. And then I have to be okay with that's what I'm getting done. And then I have to be okay with like taking some time to decompress, or go meet a friend, or, you know, go to an event or something, and not just sit and stare at my computer, because ultimately that's what I'm trying to preach as part of All Plus One's mission is that it's you're not going to be your best self if you're just sitting down and working 24/7 staring at a computer.
So I think what your life is like forcing you to do, which is like really kind of cool, is like staying present.
Yes.
Because like think about it, like
Yeah.
just the way you describe it, right? And I mean, I could be wrong, but just like a outside perspective, just the way you just described that is like, okay, I have a grander vision, but I can't like think too much about the parts. It's just like day by day. And I mean, even if you take like another example, like I know like again my cousin Zach, like he talks about like going to AA and stuff like that. It's like literally it's the mantras every day, like one day at a time. You know what I mean? That's really all we ever have. Like if you want to talk about spiritual, like deeper symbolic principles, like all you have is this present moment. And I think I really like what you talked about because I can relate to this. Is like you might have 700 emails that come in and like this guy's calling you this and this and this, but you've just decided like, hey, here's what I'm doing. That takes a lot of focus because I know as someone who's like ADHD, like oh my god, you see an email, I see it's that, like we do it all the time. We're like, okay, we're gonna do this, and it's like, oh, this text and this.
And then you get stuff on
and then you're like, where did I even go? And then that's more like they've done studies on this. It's like, oh, multitasking, like no, it's not even a real thing.
No.
Like you're getting less
done.
done.
If I got a resume and someone's like, I'm a great multitasker, I'd be like, no, you're not.
Like,
It's like no one is a great multitasker.
Like you're getting less done. Like if you can just and any like I follow like a lot of these like Tony Robbins is like just focus on the task. Like dial it in on that task. So I think that's really special and that's great advice is that just being okay, like because that's part of the unknown too, right? You're like, well, I feel unproductive, but at the end of the day, like you are cultivating a wedding, you are doing the oracle
like
job, you
are
closer
to
the edge. I'm about to break. That was a little Linkin Park but I really think that's great advice because especially personally, that's like a struggle is to just pick the things and stick to those. Like I actually just had my dad got upset at me recently because it's like, Sean, this happens every single time. He's like, I don't even take it personal anymore. It's just you. Like we make a plan and then you have like 6 other things. He's like, and he freaked like because we went to Creative Mornings and he was like, I called him at like 8:30 and he was supposed to meet me at my house at like 9 a.m. to like do car stuff and then he's like,
you're not here.
Yeah, he's like, well, no, I called him. So I called him before that, but he's like, why are you changing the plan? Are you kidding me? Like I'm just about to get in my car. So it's like,
I think part of it is like because I am starting a business, I feel like I need to like be doing all the things, but also like I'm super interested in what this community is doing, and so like coming here to do this, and then I did like a little talk thing for Crystal from Feminist Oasis on Saturday, but I was like totally overbooked on Saturday, and I was like, I'm just gonna figure this out, and so I had to like leave that early to like go do something else that I was doing, and I felt so bad, but I was like trying to do too many things because I want to do them all. And so I haven't quite mastered that yet. So I'm still trying to figure out like better time management because I'm not like, I'm constantly the person's like, okay, just kidding. I said 10:30, but can we make it 11:15? Which is a terrible, I hate, that's like one of the biggest things I need to work on.
But I think a lot of, I was talking about this with AJ and Lindsay this morning. Like I think a lot of people who kind of do their own thing or like entrepreneurs or who are kind of in that same field are like that.
Yeah, it's because we don't have as much of like a 9-to-5 structure for ourselves. So I'm trying to incorporate more of like the corporate-y environment into my day-to-day because I really do like trying to get a better routine throughout the day, like get up, work out, like have a shake or whatever for breakfast, and then sit down and do X, and then do this, and like create better routine, and then I have to like travel somewhere across the country, and it screws up everything. Shoot, so I do like really well until I have to travel, and then the rest of the week is totally gone. But there was something, I went to one of Feminist Oasis co-working like workshops, and I forget the name of the theory, or not theory, but like the practice or whatever, but you do 20-minute like intervals, and so for 20 minutes you decide like I'm gonna do X, I'm gonna respond to emails for 20 minutes, and then you take like a 5-minute break or something, and then you say for 20 minutes I'm gonna work on my business plan. And it is amazing what you can get done in 20 minutes when like you are super focused on just doing that one thing. Like I can clear out my whole inbox in 20
I'll do
minutes.
like an hour, and then I'm like,
and then
within that hour I'll like
you do like a million other things, and then if you try to do something for an hour, like your mind can't really focus that long. It's
I think this is interesting because like I think when I was like in like corporate salesy jobs, like I was good at like I feel like I could do what most people could do in 8 hours in like 4.
Yeah. Oh,
Like
God.
if you dial it, like if you create these like dialed in focused areas where you're just like completely zoned in.
Yeah.
You can get more done because the truth is like in that 8 hours most people are
They're
like
not
all over the
working.
place.
Yeah,
They're not like
not
dialed
around,
in like
yeah.
so if you can like set those, and I like the 20 minutes is
Yeah.
great because I think like that, like when they talk about like public speaking, like you have like 15 minutes is like the
Right.
average attention span.
Yep.
You know, unless you're like jumping off the walls and doing crazy activities.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think that that's actually a really cool piece of advice. And there's also like this guy did this study on like sleeping, same thing, like doing it in 20-minute intervals.
I've known people that have tried that.
That sounds awful.
Yeah.
Well,
they
if you
kind of
miss
start
one,
to
well,
go insane.
well,
yeah.
No, if you
Please,
miss
I would
one,
like
yeah,
to
if you
think
miss
so.
if you miss one, like it's
Yeah.
like
You
that
sleep
you go
for
into
20 minutes, you set an alarm, and you go back to sleep, and you do it all over again?
like I don't remember the exact. So don't
I've
quote
known
me on
people
this,
that have
but
done
like
4-hour intervals. Like you sleep for 4 hours, you're up for 4 hours. You sleep for 4 hours,
Ugh.
you're up for 4 hours. It's terrible.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah.
well, no, that sounds terrible. This guy, like some guy
Your
did
data's
this thing.
not right.
Right.
This guy tried to like hack, like did like all these like hacks with the human body and mind. And one was based on sleeping, and it was like, yeah, you would do like, I don't know, you would just take 20-minute naps and like not sleep basically. Like those 20-minute naps would suffice, but if you missed one, like,
But like, how do you
It's
fall
not
asleep? Who can just fall asleep? Like,
well,
gotta go sleep right
that's-
now.
I don't. Well,
I think
that's. But I think if
men
you're
a lot easier than women.
You think so?
Like yeah, every
well, that
male
turns
I
into
know
like,
Bullshit.
say it
just,
takes you
falls
3
asleep.
hours. Say it takes you like 3 minutes to fall asleep, then you're only sleeping for 17 minutes,
Right.
and then you're like, this is too far. This is too much.
I couldn't do it.
Scientific,
No, I need like a
scientific.
full like 8-hour.
Yeah,
8-hour
same.
person. Yeah.
Same.
I'm not one of those who like
Went to
function
bed
at
at
like 5 to
7:45
6.
last night.
That's amazing.
But I get up early too.
You
so.
do. I always see like your posts and like how early they are, and I'm
5
like,
a.m.
God damn it, I need to start getting up.
But I go to bed
early.
that's
very early.
literally.
Yeah.
That's literally.
What
I
time do you
feel
go to
every
bed?
time.
Or get up?
I go to bed between like 9:30. I get into bed between 9:30 and 10.
Yeah.
Typically, unless there's like something else going on.
Mhm.
But I don't typically fall asleep till like 11 or 11:30. I'm just like up, and then I wake up
Thinking.
on my own. If I wake up like without any disturbances, I could sleep easily till like 8:30.
See, I find now that I like eyes wide open, wake up at like 5 a.m. I'm like,
So jealous. of that.
doing.
See, that's.
So jealous.
I don't.
But I go to bed like early.
Maybe that's it. Maybe I need to like bump up my bedtime. But then I just feel like a weirdo. Like there's so many people
Oh, I
that I
do.
know that are
All
like,
of the
still
time.
like out doing things, and I'm like, no.
And then
I'm
I
going
wake
to
up and I
bed.
have like so many text messages from like
Yes.
8 p.m. to like 11, and I'm like, sorry, I missed that.
I get
was
texts at like
sleeping.
10:30, and I'm like, who texts at 10:30?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sleeping.
You know what? I want to figure out. Okay, so I'm gonna.
But then I text people at like 5 a.m. and they're like, this
Yes.
asshole.
Yeah.
Or I'll be like text people at like 5 a.m. in Colorado, and I'm like,
Oh.
oh, sorry, it was 3.
Just kidding.
My bad.
Middle of the night. Yeah. But I do agree with you in terms of meditation. I've
Yeah.
been trying to incorporate that more.
The one I want to figure out is The Rock, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, because that guy
Oh
like
yeah. Doesn't
sleeps
sleep.
like 6 hours and 48, and then he's like, yeah, just landed from Shanghai at midnight and up at 4 a.m. to do
And he
my
works
workout.
out like 8 hours a day.
And
Like
I'm
that's physically exhausting.
I think
for your
it's
body.
just how you. But he also eats like friggin' like 6
Well, there's
pizzas in
that.
his
So there's
space.
like no, we talk about this, right? Like, so when I feel like you're like in alignment, right? When you're like truly in alignment, like you just have this like insane energy that you like.
Yeah.
I don't know, that like pours through you, but then I also think he's got to be taking something like, I don't know,
Yeah.
some kind of supplement
Like
that like
stimulant?
makes you like, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out.
But I think maybe everybody's like alignment is different.
Yeah.
Like, you know what
it's
each
a great-
person
yeah.
needs is.
Like I think growing up, like my dad could always just like fall asleep like that, and he could sleep for 5 hours and be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get that.
I could never do it.
I am like that's like eating and sleep. Those are my two like. When I don't get those, I'm very vulnerable
Well,
to
and it's
not
part
be
of,
my
like,
best self.
There's
Yeah.
like the tripod they always say is like if you're not eating well, if you're not sleeping well, and you're not exercising, like your body is going to shut down on you. And if even like if one of those goes awry, like you're probably gonna feel like you're okay, but you're really not if you
Yeah.
don't take a stop.
Well, and I feel like that's where most people are, most
Yeah.
Americans
Yes.
especially. Like
Yeah.
they're not. I feel like most people are not performing as a human being to their best ability.
Agree completely.
'Cause they're
And then that
not
becomes
sleeping.
normal. Yeah.
They're not eating proper food.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think that comes back to like questioning everything. I feel like if you're constantly kind of like analyzing yourself, maybe it's the best way. Like if you like, that's like why journal's good, right? Like, how am I feeling today? Oh,
Right.
like wow, this is way different than like the joyous, exuberant person I was like 3 weeks ago. What's going on?
changed?
What's
Yeah.
changed? I don't
Well, we're
always do
always cycling too. Like we're always cycling through different. I don't know.
No, I agree. I think there's time, like that's what I'm talking about. Like I feel like I like have this like super insane high energy for like the month of January, and like lately I've been like I sleep and I like still feel like I'm like zonked.
And it's like recognizing that that's okay though, because like I feel like too we're programmed to think like the second we like don't have any energy and we like feel like our life is crumbling, that like we like cling on to that and we're like, oh, we like let it define us too. And we're like this like sad, depressed person.
Yeah.
Because we've labeled ourselves that because for one instant we're not happy.
Not
Yeah, and that's the
100%.
hardest part too. I mean, I think that's what life experience has given me because like I don't want to say I've been like depressed, but I'm like kind of sad. Like it's just been this like low energy, and it's like I've been kind of like stuck. Like, but I'm like it's okay, dude. It's just gonna cycle through, man. You know what I mean?
Oh, they stopped.
It's been an hour.
Oh, cool.
Wait, so we touched upon Creative Mornings briefly, which just reminded me that we were also so inspired by Amy. Oh,
the boob
my
lady.
God.
I just wanted to say that.
Also, which
We've been
she
calling her the
emailed
boob
me, and
lady.
she's one of the people I haven't emailed back. So
she's
I know. I'm like, I wish she was watching. I was like, that'd be one of those fangirl moments where I'm like, are you saw my podcast? No, she was amazing. Like absolutely.
Oh my God.
Amazing. And I've told everyone about it. Like I'm like, oh, like you don't even have boobs, you should download this app.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my God, you were so moved. Like Sean and I somehow got in the front row. Why were we sitting? I've never sat in the front row. Oh, Keith like put us there to take a picture, and we like didn't move. We were just like sitting in the front row, like everything she said. I was like,
she was
yeah.
I mean, she presents so well. She was funny, like.
She was like so real,
really,
like so real in the moment, but also like the perfect amount of like funny and intelligent.
Well, that was, it was real. Just the only word is real.
It was real.
It's just a real experience. Like you're a badass, but you're real.
It was so.
And
good.
then she dropped like an F-bomb. I'm like, yeah. So, like you're so real. Like I was like, wow. So she seems like a super like awesome businessman. She's like,
yeah. What was it about her that just like? Really stuck with you.
I think I identified with like that sense in her where she was like, you know, we're gonna go on this show and we're gonna pitch our app, and then they all turned us down. Okay, now I'm gonna go buy a bus. Like, you know, and it was just not this like you let yourself like have that moment of like this sucks, and then you cry and you do whatever you need to do to get out of your system, and then you're like, okay, what's next? And that's just how I've been my whole life, and so it was really inspiring to see her like embody it in her way and talk about it and show that it can be successful and so because I feel like I've done it a million times, and you know hopefully this time with you know All+1 and co-working is like my pump spotting moment. It was just really inspiring, and I think as I don't even want to say a female entrepreneur. I have like this big pet peeve. It was part of the talk that we did for Feminist Oasis on Saturday was this whole like girl boss movement and boss babe, like that we're not women and we're not bosses, we're girls and babes, and like it drives me nuts. And so I don't even want to say like she was inspiring as a female entrepreneur, like she was inspiring as a strong female, as an entrepreneur, and also as like a mother. Like she's has a family, like it's because as someone that's getting married and wants to have kids, like that's a scary thing to think about. Like I feel like I'm crazy all the time, and then I look at people that have children and I'm like, how the F do you do this? Like so it's like she was super inspiring, and I'm sure she has her days behind the scenes where she's like, what am I doing?
Well, she even talked about those days
exactly
too,
like crying on the floor in the airport bathroom, and everyone does have those days, but she was really amazing. So I have her on top of my list today to email back.
So off of that, what are your like go-to like pieces of advice for people like when you have those days?
Oh God. That it's okay to take a time out. Like it really is. So Friday was a tough day for me, and I haven't really had one in a while. Like a really like bad day. Like I can say it's been like a very long like months since I've had like a really bad day. And so it sort of took me by surprise. I was like, what is this? Like everything's been so good lately. Like, what is this day? And it was pretty funny. I finally just like hit my breaking moment, and I came home and I like stripped down and crawled into bed. And Chris came upstairs and he's like, wow, so normally I get stressed and I go like, grab some beer or like, play some video games. He's like, you get naked and get into bed. And I was like, yep, that's exactly what I do. And so I just had to like
getting back to the core of it. super raw.
Yeah. So I was
funny.
like, I was like, well, it just like felt kind of gross to like crawl into bed fully clothed.
Yeah.
So I was like, no,
But you're like letting go of all that
I was
negative
like,
energy.
Get out, like crawl back into bed, and then I like got
hilarious.
out of bed like 20 minutes later, and it was like kind of a refresh. Like I was like, oh, I'm starting my day over again.
That's
so
awesome.
It was pretty.
I might try that.
Yeah,
I love that.
So you're having a really tough day, like
Just get
get
naked,
naked, get
go to
into bed.
Yeah, start all over again. Just
Naked.
20 minutes though.
That's all you need. Hey, 20 minute
20
intervals.
minute
intervals.
20 minute intervals. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah. So that was sort of my reset, and then just like not being afraid to like lean on people. Like I went and like met Pam to pick up some tables from Brass and Pine.
Yeah.
And we had a glass of wine, and I was like, "Girl, let me tell you about my day."
Yeah.
And, it's like sometimes like I walked out of there, and I was like, "God, I hope she didn't feel like that was like a therapy session where I was just like ranting." But it's like sometimes you just need those people. Like,
you need that. Not to just like I think we're like I'm struggling with this. It's just like holding everything inside and like not releasing it. And then it all builds up. So I think it's so important that you said that. Like, yeah, sometimes a glass of wine with a friend just to let it all out is what you need after the whole naked in bed thing.
Exactly.
Like intervals.
Or if you do want to truly multitask, like maybe the wine while you're
and
in
bed. Have a friend come over. If
exactly.
Might get weird.
Yeah. It's so funny.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, everyone's got that.
Yeah, we are running out of time a little bit, but I think kind of
pull out.
I know, right?
So fast.
It goes by fast. There is just one other thing that I did want to touch upon because I think it's been. I think we've talked about it a little bit, but like this idea that you're like very adaptable in like all kinds of different situations.
Yeah.
Like I think it's kind of obvious where that's come from.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think just from moving around a ton and like always being the new girl in school and moving to different schools and having to like make friends all over again and just get used to a new environment and new schedule and I think that's where like the whole like, oh, I just don't think about it, I just do it. Because if you like get bogged down in being the new girl and like first day of school, like you like imagine how much anxiety as a child you have. So I just did it, and it's I think has been probably, if I look at like the different career paths that I've done where I was like a pastry chef, I worked in fashion, like I started businesses and worked in IT sales, and each one of those times it's not like I had that background or that like specific training. And so I think just being sort of that like chameleon that's like able to get into a situation and be like, oh, maybe I'm not going to be the best pastry person at this restaurant, but I'll figure it out. Like, and then but I also think the Leo in me is like, no, I will be the best.
I get that.
And in sales, like I was like, no, like I'm gonna be the best.
I'm actually gonna be better than all of you.
So I also have that driving force too, where I'm like, I need to,
Be the best.
Yeah.
Be the best.
Well, I think what's cool about that too is, it like goes into a much deeper principle. Is that like really, the ego is what like puts people in boxes, right? Like you are X, you are X, you are this, and it's like if you can kind of like tap into the core of what we are, which is like in my idea like unlimited potential.
Yeah.
You can adapt and be anything.
Yeah.
Like any human being in this world is not just like you. Like can be a chameleon.
Yeah.
It's just like, do you have the belief in yourself?
Right.
Like you learned how to walk. At no point in that where you're like, oh, I don't think I'm gonna do it. You know what I mean? Like you just figured it out.
Do it.
You know what I mean? So it's like it's like that with anything, but I think especially in our age, like millennials, whatever, I can fully admit for a long time it's like the age of instant gratification. If you don't get it now, it's like, okay, I can't do it. Done.
Yeah.
So it's like if you can just have that tenacity, that belief in yourself, and that's what it always comes back to. No matter what anyone else is saying, like you were always just like, I'm gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that's like ultra important for viewers, for anyone out there, is just that guys, like you have the ability, like that's the whole point of this. You have the ability to do whatever you want.
Absolutely.
And I think the other piece of this is like you've done so many things, and all of those were building skill sets, and all of those were building to this moment.
And it's
and
funny.
Like,
I kind of pull like the different experiences, and I'm like, I did so many different things along the way, and when I was coming up with All Plus One, I was like, I feel like each one of those was a building block to like build this business. And had I gone and like decided like, oh, I'm going to go work for a co-working space and I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to do this, I'd have all these preconceived notions of what it was supposed to be like and doing this. But if you just like take from your own experiences and build what you think it should be, it's, I mean, some of the most successful businesses, when I'm like obsessed with reading about like how the entrepreneurs have started and how I built this podcast on NPR, and so many of them were like, yeah, like I just, you know, I'd never done a spin studio before, but I just decided that I liked cycling, so I was going to do one. Or like, oh, I'd never started a hotel, but I just decided to start Airbnb. Or like, you know, it's like not having that preconceived notion is really, I think, the strength, and just kind of figuring out what you want it to be.
Well, and that's what makes you stand out too.
Right.
It's like not trying to be something
that
you're not.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like the fun, just to kind of like wrap that all up, is it's like perspective, right? Every single person has a different lens through which they see the world. So it's like, how was that restaurant? Oh, I didn't really like it. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to go find out for myself. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's so important. Is like, for me, I actually had a girl that I dated that called me a sheep one time. She's like, because I was just like, oh, like I heard this. And she's like, oh, do you just believe everything that people say without like looking into it? And I was like, obviously it was like a socket to me, you know? But it was like, honestly, it was one of the most like, I'm so grateful for that, because like ever since then I was like, oh, like it's like someone punched me in the chest. I was like, I guess maybe I am. I was like, oh, and then so like ever since then it's like I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of research, and like I go and formulate my own opinion, because it's like I was like, wow, that was like really powerful. Like that hurt when you said that. I wanted to cry, but
they do say that relationships are the best mirror to the soul.
Oh, that's for sure.
That's my wise
Buddha
moment.
Oh wow. Soak it in, kids. So yeah, the final question here. What do you think having a wild heart means?
Oh yeah, I loved this question. So I think I feel like I'm just reiterating some of the things I put in my little question paper.
Practice.
I think in my, you know, I had said in like my early 20s, if you'd asked me that, it would have been like running around and traveling and just being able to like bounce to this place or this place on a moment's notice. And I think we connected on that a lot in terms of just like needing that travel to feel fulfilled. And more as I've gotten older, because I'm so old at 33, it really has just become more about like this burning desire to have, you know, a better community around me, be a better person, have, you know, family and have friends, and just create that, you know, really that little bubble versus like going out and searching for it constantly. But I think it's funny when there's that whole like cheesy tribe quote, like what is it? It's like something about like searching. Oh no, like the searching, like when you travel, like finding yourself, like, oh, I'm not lost, or something like. Oh, what's that whole?
I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's like the travel.
Not everyone who travels is lost or whatever.
Like I kind of disagree with that. So, and it's not. I mean, obviously, like people go on vacations and explore and like want to see different cultures, but for me, it was very much like a feeling of being lost and like thinking like, oh, the next place I'll be found, and the next place I'll be happy, and the next place I'll do this. And so I think, you know, having that wild heart is really more about, again, being one with all of yourself.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Oh, I love that so much.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for All of Us One.
Thanks.
Is there, what else, any like last tidbits of information on All of Us One?
Oh yeah, so we
Opening
are,
dates,
I feel like I've been
things.
saying this for a very long time. We are so close to opening officially. For those that don't know, and I'm sending out I'm sending out an email to my, like an email newsletter thing soon-ish with updates on all of this, but they, our biggest delay was because of all the sound work. So we're above a spin studio, and you know, the owners of the building had to do a lot of work to ensure that you could work and not hear all of those really fun classes down below you. So that was about 6 months of the last work with them, and so my contractors finally got in. And so the space is changing very quickly. Like all the framing is done. Yeah, they've painted all the ceilings. It's so exciting. So the next couple of weeks are gonna fly by. Anybody wants to go to IKEA and buy furniture with me?
Yeah,
that's coming up real soon.
Yeah.
So we're targeting right now like mid-March as our opening. I'm really hoping it'll all depend on the inspectors. but I'm really hoping that we can get a certificate of occupancy and do like a friends and family soft opening in the beginning of March.
Oh my gosh, yes, please.
Yeah.
We'll
So
be
stay
there.
tuned.
Is there like
We'll be there.
websites where the people
Yeah,
find
so
you?
It's
those
all
things?
dash plus dash one, like all spelled out.com. You can go and join the newsletter, and then when I finally sit down and come up with that email newsletter, you'll get
it. And you're on Instagram.
I am, yep, all dot plus dot one.
Okay.
And then
Facebook.
Facebook is like all plus one social.
It's
I think.
tagged on my
Yeah,
thing.
it's tagged.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, on all the
And then
things.
website.
Yeah, website.
right?
Yeah,
Already did
yeah.
that.
all
Oh, you
dash-
said that?
Yeah,
She
all
said
dash
the
plus
website.
I like that.
I will side note, my website's not totally done. It's not like, but
I feel you.
the more important stuff is up there.
Cool.
Yeah, those are all the things that get pushed to the back when you're like, oh, I gotta figure out my floor plan. Like,
Oh my gosh.
Small
Oh.
details. What else?
tiny details.
What else?
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
Well,
you so
thank
much
you
for
for coming,
being
Stephanie.
here.
It was a
Yeah,
pleasure
thanks
That
having
was
you.
so good.
Yeah.
Yay.
That's awesome.
Everyone all check out All Plus
Yeah.
One.
Have a great week.
Yay. Okay, let's end these things.
Later
Oh,
and
did I-
live video.